How's it feeling?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the August the 21st, 2013 meeting of the Frederick County Planning Commission. Could you join us in a moment of silence, please? Thank you. I have an amendment to our agenda, and at the bottom, you will see that we end up with number 8, which is adjourn. We're going to put in a new number 8, which is other, and we've got a number of things to talk with you about under others. So 7 is the way it is, 8 is other, and 9 is adjourn. Could we have a motion, please?
Madam Chairman, move we adopt the revised agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Let's see here, we've got minutes of July the 17th.
Madam Chair, move for adoption of the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. We do have a couple of our committee reports. Mr. Unger, I've got 2 for you, I think. DRC and the Sanitation Authority.
Sanitation Authority, we met last night. First thing on the agenda, they have 49 new services in the last quarter, which is really good for them. That's more than they projected. The rainfall for the last month was 5.39 inches. Previous month was 3.62, which is up considerably. Everything seems to be staying green, and the water's doing real well in the quarries, looks like. The Deal plant, they pulled 2.2 million gallon a day. The Anderson plant, they pulled 2.4 million gallon a day, which is about normal. They purchased 0.84 million gallon per day from the city, which is what we've been doing, between that and 75. Daily average is 5.53 million gallon per day, and we were using 5.35, up a little bit. And the reason for that, they found some more leaks in their system that they didn't know they had, so they're working on fixing them to hopefully bring that down some. The Deal plant has actually raised about a foot from last month, which is good. The Anderson plant dropped a few inches, and they're pulling more water out of it than they usually are, so that's a reason for that, but it didn't go down very much. And the other thing that they're working on, they was working on a production well they were digging to hopefully feed some of the quarries, and they didn't have much luck with that production well. It didn't produce like they thought it would. And other than that, that's about all we talked about.
Thank you, sir. We did have a DRRC meeting that was within the month.
I don't have a report on that.
Okay. Well, one of the items is the information discussion item on the heights on the buildings, I believe. Is that correct? Anything else, Candace? Okay. So both of those items are on our agenda. Okay. Thank you. Let's see, Mr. Maddox is not here. Winchester Planning Commission. It is my utter joy to welcome Ms. Martha Schickel, representing the Winchester Planning Commission this evening. Welcome, Martha, and do you have a report for us?
I do. We met yesterday in a regular meeting, and we had 3 conditional use permit requests, 2 of which dealt with communications towers. One was a little bit easier to deal with. It was basically for relocation of new 4G equipment upgrades, same site. So we did recommend approval to the council for that. The second was more difficult, and it had to do with the city's own telecommunications systems with emergency response. And after a lengthy discussion, we did recommend approval. It was a 4-2 vote, so we'll see what council chooses to do with that. But the site was recommended as the preferred site by the consultant, but still I think there are some community issues that the council will have to reconcile. We also talked about a text amendment that had been initiated last month having to do with restaurants and entertainment establishments, essentially changing the conditional use process in our downtown and other similar districts to try to make it a little bit more streamlined of a process for those types of businesses to open and operate in the community. And then the last two had to do with rezonings. The first with regard to corridor enhancement along Berryville Avenue, and that was recommended for approval as well. And finally, we had a rezoning request from a private property developer to renovate and redevelop the Coke bottling plant on Valley Avenue, mixed-use property, and that was also forwarded to council with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you.
Sure.
When's that's coming up?
Mr. Chuck?
Decades.
We,
giving some
I
assistance,
see the technical assistance going on.
Yeah.
And we all need it. We have a report regarding the development consults.
Okay, very briefly, I think we've got some of our technical glitches worked out since the last meeting, and we're now up and running. Our first assignment came out yesterday, and it pertains to a review of the urban centers and traditional neighborhood designs, and they are seeking comments from the members of the Development Consults Committee on the on these two districts and how they work, and just overall comments, and to see if there's any problems with it, constrictions, and so forth. So that assignment is due in a couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more to report at our next Planning Commission meeting.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ruddy, DRRC will meet on the 26th of this month?
The CPPC will be.
I mean CPPC, okay. Are we going to have a CPPC meeting next month?
That will
Okay.
replace the September.
Okay, so there's just one meeting, and that'll be on August the 26th. Okey doke. I think that takes care of our committee reports. This is the time on our agenda when we open the meeting to citizen comments on anything that's not on our agenda. So if there's something on your mind and you'd like to come forward? Anyone? Okay, we'll close the citizen comment.
Madam Chairman, the next item on the agenda, I have a client that's a neighbor to this, and depending on the outcome, it could impact them financially, so I'm going to recuse myself.
Thank you, sir. Our first item is a rezoning. It's 03-13 Madison Village, submitted by Painter Lewis, PLC, to rezone 51.26 acres from RA Rural Areas District to 46.26 acres of RP Residential Performance District and 5 acres of B2 General Business District with proffers. The property is located on the west side of Route 522, approximately 1,000 feet south of the intersection of Route 522 and Airport Road, and is in the Shawnee Magisterial District. Mr. Ruddy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. This residential rezoning is one, of course, that we haven't seen a residential rezoning in a good number of years. So this is in front of us tonight, and as you said, it is to rezone 51.26 acres from the RA district to 46.26 acres of RP residential performance and 5 acres of B2 commercial, B2 commercial at the entrance on 522. Proffers are associated with this request, and it is down in the Shawnee Magisterial District, and highlighted on the screen to your left is the property. And you can see the property is outlined in black. It has direct frontage on Route 522, south of the city of Winchester. It's surrounded by several residentially zoned properties. Immediately to the north, we have the Russell 150 project. Across Route 522 south, a variety of existing residential uses going into Buffalo Heights. And to the south, some existing RP residential land uses in the older, lower density residential subdivisions. To the west and to the south, there is land that is designated for future residential growth, but is currently vacant. And I'll point out the two parcels, if you will, in the northern corner, northeast of this project, and they're both zoned B2 commercial. Both these projects, these properties and the Russell 150 were rezoned in about 2006, again, to get the B2 commercial and to get the residential and commercial zoning of the Russell 150 project. So with that orientation, I think we'll kind of pull out a little bit and show how the property is located in relation to the county's road network in that general area. And of course, we see the star highlights the property 522 is immediately to the east of it. And just to the west is a highlighted blue-dashed major collector road, and that's the extension of Warrior Drive. We see to the north that extends into the Russell 150 project and connects with Airport Road Extended. So that gives us some idea of the perspective of the property in relation to the county's long-range transportation efforts. When we look at this particular request, of course, the RP zoning designation and the B2 are consistent with the county's comprehensive plan and the Senseney Eastern Frederick Urban Area Plan. Now, there are potential impacts that go along with any rezoning request, and I'll discuss those in a moment, but let's recognize the comprehensive plan and that Senseney area plan, which calls for a higher density residential development, higher density residential land use in this general area. It also recognizes a mix of commercial in with the various residential components in the county's urban areas. So again, the higher density residential is an important note with this particular request in the comprehensive plan. So as I said, the application contains proffers that are aimed at mitigating the impacts of the particular development, and part of that proffer package is the generalized development plan that will be presented here this evening by the applicant. Just to highlight a few things, it recognizes the internal road system, access to Route 522. It recognizes the commercial land bay at the front, at the entrance, if you order 522, and the residential land areas. It also recognizes the future public road connections to the west and also to the south, two projects that would be anticipated at some point in the future. As we zoom on into the particular generalized development plan, I think it's important to recognize some of the initial part of this project, and that is the access to and from at 522, and the public road connections that will be made with the initial part of the development prior to occupancy, and that would be the public road connection to the north to the Russell 150 project, and the completion of all improvements, if you will, on 522, providing access to the site, also including the profit into parcel connections to those commercial properties to ensure that they would have access as the project would continue. This is an exhibit that the applicant will present a little bit later, and that's their rendition of how the land base and the open space and the commercial areas would fall together. But to recognize some of the impacts associated with the request a little bit further, obviously the impact analysis that was provided by the applicant was quite thorough, including the traffic impact analysis. Staff pointed out a couple of items that I'll just make mention of here again, and that's the proposed residential density and the public street connections. So it's important for the Commission to consider that. The maximum density that the applicant has proffered is 640 units, and that is, of course, in keeping with that higher density residential. But it's important to also recognize that no minimum amount of residential units and no minimum residential density has been committed to. So we would like to be sure with this project that it does achieve a higher density residential land use such as the comprehensive plan would call for. So obviously this evening we're seeking a Planning Commission recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, but again before that I mentioned the residential density, ensuring we get a higher density, higher level residential density, and also the public street connections. These roads aren't major collector roads. Of course, Warrior Drive and Airport Road Extended are part of the Eastern Road Plan that recognize those connections, but the timing of them to the adjacent properties we feel is important. The applicant has proposed to do that with the Master Development Plan, so they know that they will be located and done in conjunction with the residential development that comes with the master plan. Of course, we're familiar in the past with ensuring that the rezoning proffers provide those triggers too, to give us a greater level of comfort that the connections will be made. So those are two things I point out with regards to the general impacts for this rezoning application. Again, be happy to try and answer any questions the Commission may have as we continue into this rezoning application. And I know Mr. John Lewis is here representing the application this evening. But before I let John come up, I did want to mention one thing. The impact statement discussed the opportunity for a parks and recreation, a community park in this general area, the capital improvement plan. That's something that the applicant has met with the county's Parks and Recreation Department on, and we're trying to facilitate some sort of positive relationship there in the future. And we look forward to that being something that can happen in the future, but it's not part of the proffer statement right now, and that's okay at this point. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lewis.
May I ask you a question first,
Yes, ma'am.
please? And that is, you mentioned high density, and I know that read within the material that the however many 640 units is 12.5 units per acre?
That's correct, but if you account also for the commercial, that's actually 13.8, 12.4 or 13.8, depending on how it's calculated.
Okay, and so what is the range of density that high density translates to?
Yeah, there's 12 to 16 units per acre is the high-density residential. And again, that is what the land use plan, the comprehensive plan calls for. Historically, we've seen a much lower density, 2, 3, 4 units an acre, and that's what we would be looking to avoid. Before I sit down, there is one more thing that I need to mention, and that is as we head into the public hearing for this item, I will also recognize that while a sign was placed on the property several weeks ago, a sign has not been available and posted, not been available and visible for the past several days. So as we go through and have the public hearing on this particular application, we want to be also thoughtful that we may need to revisit this with an appropriately recognized and posted public hearing. Thank you.
Is there any other questions of Mike at this point?
Just something quick. What type of units are you looking to put in there, Mike?
I'm not looking to put anything in, but the applicant may well be. He's looking for townhouses and apartment buildings, housing types at this point. Now, the proffer statement provides the ability for single-family detached, attached, and multifamily homes. So it provides the opportunity for all three. It's my understanding that the applicant's looking to provide townhouses and multifamily housing of a variety of unique approaches to those housing types, but those are the housing types.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Commission. I'm John Lewis with Painter Lewis. I'm here to represent the project. The owner envisions this project as a high-density residential development with a commercial component. The comp plan identifies this land as having a residential density of 12 to 16 units per acre. The impacts identified in our application, including utilities, transportation, schools, and environment, are based on the construction of 640 units on 46 acres. That number is approaching a density, as Mike said, of 14 units per acre. Staff has noted in their report that the application does not place a minimum on the number of proposed units. In other words, the construction of single-family traditional residential lots is really not contemplated by the comp plan on this piece of land. And low-density development is not the purpose or the intention of our application. The master development plan we intend to submit subsequent to the approval of this rezoning request will reflect a mix of apartments and townhouses. If I can try to slide this over. Oh, yeah. Oops. What we're showing here in this concept rendering in the brown areas, obviously, is apartments and townhomes. And we're working on several plans that show apartments in that northern quadrant, townhomes south of the first road, townhomes to the west of the southerly road, and a mix in the southeast quadrant of apartments and townhomes. While we have in our proffer statement addressed impacts for single family, we are not at this point envisioning single family homes here. We believe this amount of infrastructure is going to require a fairly heavy density to support the road network that we're proposing and that we're actually proffering. Regarding the transportation impacts, our meeting with staff have resulted in road improvements that were shown on the GDP and the concept rendering. Staff has stressed the importance of providing public road connections to the north, west, and south in support of long-range transportation planning. And we have proffered to construct these roads. Initial road construction is going to include Route 522 turn lanes, Route 522 entrance, the first intersection, and a connection to the north. In other words, all the improvements we're showing in the red area that's adjacent to the commercial. I can tell you now, we're not really planning on developing the commercial component. There's a lot of commercial space available in the county. We believe the market's for the high-density residential, but we're going to reserve that. Looking into the crystal ball, if we have 640 units, somebody's going to want to put commercial on that corner. We think that's good planning. Timing for the extension of these roads to the western and southern boundaries will be tied to subsequent phases of construction. And these phases we intend to show on the master development plan. I believe that the planning staff has sufficient authority over the master development plan and site plan processes to ensure that Madison Village will be consistent with land use designation, that is high density. I also believe that the application has adequately addressed all of the development impacts, and I look forward to working with staff and the Planning Commission on this project. I hope you agree with me that this project is worthy of your approval. That's really all I have. Are there any questions?
Questions of Mr. Lewis?
Just,
Mr. Unger?
John, is it too early to say how many trips per day you're expecting at build-out? The only reason I'm looking is what it's going to do to 522, and assume there'll be a road over to Paper Mill Road at that time.
We haven't proffered any road over Paper Mill Road. No,
Just thinking how everybody's going to get out.
on a complete TIA, and we have identified that trip number. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. But, you know, we have identified all of the traffic impacts. We've met with VDOT. We know what we're going to do on 522. We've proffered a traffic signal when it's warranted at that intersection also.
Will that handle the traffic that'll be running in there if they all have to exit at one place?
Yes.
Wow.
Any other questions?
John, surrounding, and maybe Mike touched on this, and I was busy with our newfangled gadgets here, but our surrounding landowners, have they been consulted? I mean, is this all, I guess I haven't went through the whole package here because it's quite lengthy, but for one, I was curious why the sign wasn't up, but the second part of my question is what an impact this has on the schools. Is this being built in stages? I mean, what is y'all's build at on something of this magnitude or anticipated? I know the economy is so drives everything, but
If I were
does
to
he have a
guess,
game plan, I guess, so
I
to
would
speak?
say it's going to be 15 to 20 years,
Okay,
unless we have a significant change in the economy.
okay. And back to the what's our surrounding zoning there? I don't know, maybe that's a question for Mike.
It's RA.
Okay,
To the southeast, it's RP.
okay,
And of course, to the north, it's Russell 150.
yeah, okay. Thank you, John.
And at the end, Mr. Mohn?
Actually, I have a question for staff, so if,
Okay, and do you have for John?
You know, on your design years, 2026 for your build-out, based on your impact model you have, you show that the northbound left turn level of service would drop down to a D. What do you propose to mitigate that? And I really couldn't find here. You have a lot of, I mean, there's some A's, C's, but that one D kind of pops out as the level of service.
Well, the TIA has to take into consideration all the future development. Russell 150, perhaps the development of the parcels to the west, All that has to be rolled into that. And if we are looking at just a single entrance here and one road, one east-west road, then it's going to be a level D. However, what we are assuming and what is probably going to happen is we're going to have other east-west connectors that will mitigate that and raise that to a level C or better. But we have to, I mean, we have certain things we have to do in the TIA, and that's how we have to approach it, as though this were the only road. And that approach has been accepted by VDOT and approved.
Okay, so it shows a queue length of 250 feet essentially that will build up with that level D service, and VDOT has concurred with that.
Yes.
Anyone else?
John, with this size of thing, and in future down the road with Parks and Rec, what are you anticipating that to be with this amount of, do you have the land mass and this density to put something in with Parks and Rec, or do you have?
We've had one meeting, we drafted a proffer statement to include that we have chosen not to include at this point because we just have not fleshed that out sufficiently. In the initial meeting, I will tell you that the amount of land that Parks and Rec was looking for is not probably going to work. I mean, this is only 50 acres.
Yeah.
And once you take out a couple of acres for the right-of-way and the environmental features that we have, you're limiting the amount of actual developable land that you can afford to give away.
Sure. Is your discussions along the line of not so much land mass, but then would be structures? Would it be come back to a community center, swimming pool type of thing like that? Where we've seen it in the
Parks
past?
and Rec doesn't want, I offered them a swimming pool, but Parks and Rec doesn't want to maintain it. I will tell you that we are anticipating a rec center swimming pool facility. And again, that's going to be shown on the master development plan.
Okay.
Anything else?
John, can you help me? Where does that dump out at on 522? As far as, I'm kind of familiar with 522. Where's it at? Where the road's coming out at?
It's about 1,000 feet south of Airport Road, maybe. no,
Close to-
2,500 feet south of Airport Road.
Close to what area? What's there?
Well, there aren't any significant landmarks there, other than it's the only high point we could find where we could get sight distance. There's a fellow named Mr. Hockman who lives on that 5-acre piece that's outlined in black there.
And what is that road to the south, John, that is on the right-hand side?
Oh, that's Longcroft.
That down?
If you know that road, then you can find at least the partial southern boundary.
No, I know where it's at. Since you said that, I know where you're talking. Okay.
Yes.
Just one more
Mr.
question,
Thomas.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
There was a, make sure I have it right, 28 June letter from Frederick County Public Schools to you where they expressed concern and talked about impacts and numbers of students and everything. Did you respond to that letter?
What we were doing, I believe that's where they wanted a specific amount proffered.
Well, it's where they talked about the number of students, and I assume they got the breakdown from you, 384 townhouses, 256 apartments, and it will have 187 students, and it gave a breakdown of the distribution, talked about the additional operating costs and the capital costs. And yes, I guess they did throw a $3,000 figure in there per unit per year. But did you respond back to that letter at all, or?
What we did, we revised our proffer since then and resubmitted to the
Okay.
school board, and they have responded in kind. So, yes, we did respond to it.
Okay.
And what we're doing is exactly what the development model requires us to do as far as voluntary cash proffers.
So that their numbers of townhouses and apartments are now your numbers versus what they had in their letter? They were off, John. That's okay.
I mean, it's going to be what it's going to be. You know,
Okay.
you get a CO for a townhouse and you pay X number of dollars, exactly what the development model indicates. And
I
that's
meant-
what we
I
intend
meant
to
the
do.
numbers.
That's also what we've proffered to do.
Excuse me. I meant the numbers of each. We won't worry about it, but initially, their tally on the number of apartments and number of townhouses were different than what you're proposing.
I don't know how they get their numbers from their model. I'm sure it's correct, but again, it depends on how many we built, which is not something that anybody can really tell at this point.
Okay. Anything else for Mr. Lewis?
John, do you know what, and I know Mr. Unger touched on this, what type of unit that they anticipate putting in there? Obviously, it's townhouses, it's not garden apartments, but it's mainly townhouses. We talking 1, 2, 3 bedroom, that a mixed bag, so to speak? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is could influx the school system depending on how much are we going for upper end? Or, I mean, is this a mid-level type of development that we're looking at, or?
As far as the townhouses go,
Yeah.
they will be 2 and 3 bedroom more than likely.
Okay,
As far as the apartments go, they're going to be 2 and 1 bedroom more than likely.
okay,
We're looking at 800 to 900 square feet for an apartment.
okay. So your target there is not so much family in those are,
I don't know. We
wherever the market would bear again. Okay,
don't think that's where the market is.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Moan?
John, just one question for you. Follow up to staff's comments about the density and the land use designation. I'm not sure I'm concerned so much about a number, or a density that you might be assigning, but, in looking at your GDP and in looking at the proffers, I mean, it's pretty generic. It's residential. And it doesn't really give us any assurance that it would be a mix of single-family attached and, even straight single-family attached, or a mix of single-family attached and multifamily. I mean, literally, at the master plan, based on, the way this is put together, you could come in legitimately and put in a mix of single-family detached and attached, or any combination of units that the district would allow. Is it something that you guys have considered and chosen not to do? I mean, I'm looking at the rationale for not designating, at least on your GDP or by proffer, that it is a mix of single-family attached and multifamily, so that there's consistency when you come in with the master development plan, that there's no question that that's the housing type or a mix of those types that's going to be delivered. And I think I'm looking at that from the land use conformance issue.
Well, I believe that the planning staff has the authority through the master development plan process to make certain that what we're talking about in this meeting gets executed at the master development plan stage. In other words, if we come in a couple of months with 100 single-family residential lots, that's not going to get approved. Now, do we want to proffer out single-family? I mean, we could consider it, but there might be opportunities for that, or there might be the ability to put that in. We never like to limit that sort of development. We never like to put that up front, and I don't know that it's necessary because of the master development planning process that we have to go through. I understand that you all don't have any authority other than you will review it. But I would imagine you would chastise staff pretty severely if they approved a single-family residential development here. And again, that's not our intention.
Yeah, I understand, and I think, the intent notwithstanding, my concern would be if this were to sit and you all aren't in the picture anymore, the original owner or developer isn't a part of the package, that, the way the master plan process works, and I defer to staff and the county attorney to clarify this, but if it's not specified by proffer, then it defers to the ordinance. And if the ordinance would allow single-family detached or a lower density form of development in the district, which it would, being RP, we may chastise them, but, there's nothing that, can force them necessarily to compel somebody to develop at the planned density or even what was intended, based on the comments during the public hearing. So it would help me to see that, so I'm going to put that out there. I'm not saying that I've got a problem with a mix of different unit types or anything, but the reality of it is I think that, we could be expecting one thing and what could happen could be something quite different. So I just want to make that comment and leave that with you for consideration.
Well, I don't know why the county administrator would sign such a document. He has to sign that, so does the planning director. Why they would sign a document that does not conform with the comp plan or the intention of this rezoning, I would say we need to change the process. That's the way I look at it.
I wouldn't disagree with you necessarily about changing the process. What I would say is that, the time for us to ensure that it's conforming with our comp plan is now through the rezoning. So once it gets to the master plan, that's an administrative action. So my point simply is that we need to be aware that if I'm wrong or if I'm right, I defer to staff or the county attorney to, chime in. But I'm just raising a concern because I think it's a legitimate concern that that's the way the process would unfold. And again, notwithstanding the intent that's been stated tonight. I'm not questioning you. It's just what could happen. Yeah.
Yeah, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chris, did you have a question of Mr. Roddy?
It's essentially in follow-up to what Mr. Lewis and I were talking about. I think it would be beneficial for some clarity on how the master plan fits with this. Certainly, it can achieve certain things in implementing what's been proffered and what's been shown in the process, but relative to land use, what is the latitude that staff has in terms of approving or denying what would come forward?
The master development plan would be anything that's allowed under the RP zoning designation. Once it's zoned RP without any restrictive or more defined proffers, it could be single-family, traditional housing types, all the way through apartment housing types. So that's the benefit of putting it in the rezoning proffer statement, because that provides that additional level of regulation. It's an additional part of the zoning ordinance that then further refines those housing types. In this case, if we're trying to get a higher density residential, then the proffer is definitely the place to refine that and say townhouses, apartments, or no single-family detached. Again, once it comes to the master development plan, while we work with the applicants very closely and trying to ensure that it's a master development plan that works, in particular with other projects in the area, it's fundamentally a checklist against the current zoning ordinance or the additional proffers that are placed on that property.
Mr. Thomas?
In the proffer statement, the developer has included what the owner, the typical amount for a single-family detached dwelling and a single-family attached dwelling. And for the apartments, it says the owner proffers to pay the Treasurer of Frederick County the amount determined by the then current Frederick County impact model for each of the prospective phases of the project.
Yep.
Is there and I don't remember, is there a significant difference in the proffer for apartments than for single-family attached or single-family detached?
It's a little bit lower, of course, because the number of impacts generated are certainly less. And that's kind of a unique thing to point out, because this is the first residential rezoning we've had in some time. But what we did discover, it's actually the first residential rezoning we've had for multifamily units. And to that extent, the applicant approached the county, and we worked in conjunction with the county attorney to try and craft something, because initially these multifamily residential units will be rental, and not as a condominium or as an outright sale to an individual. So if we're looking at potentially 24 units or 48 units in the first two buildings, that was quite a down payment that the applicant would have to make, and there would be no income to provide that. So that's why we wanted to ensure that the impact would be secured on the county's side of things. A down payment would be placed to start the ball rolling, if you will. But it gave some flexibility for the development to actually get off the ground until they leased those rental units out and could turn them over to perhaps a straight out sale condominium type of apartment project.
So that first group won't classify as a apartment, it'll classify as a attached multifamily? Is that what you're saying?
They'll be multifamily. Again, it's single-family detached, single-family attached, and multifamily are the three categories. There's a difference in each of the development impact model calculations. The multifamily is less, and the applicant approached the county with this kind of a unique approach to it, and it was put into a form that was acceptable to the county attorney, and that's part of where we're at here this evening. It's something unique and different, but approach that may well work.
Any other questions of Mike?
Thank you very much.
May I ask a question here? How many folks are here to speak at the public hearing for this item? One. I think that is evidence of the fact that there was not much identification on the property. I know I tried to find it and didn't. We will go ahead and hold that public hearing this evening, and we will also probably look at some other opportunity for others to speak with us. So I will open the public hearing. Sir, if you'd like to speak with us, and if you'll give us your name and magisterial district, please, that'd be
Absolutely. My
great.
name is Michael Shepard, and I live in the Shawnee Magisterial District. My wife and I purchased two parcels identified as tax map parcels 64A14 and 64A15 back in 2003. Our properties were rezoned B2 by the Board of Supervisors on April 14th, 2004. I'm the orange properties on the map up here, the two small parcels. They have each roughly 100 feet of frontage on 522, and they're roughly 250 feet deep, just over half acre each. We reached an interparcel developmental agreement for buffers with the Russell 150 in 2006 when their property was rezoned concerning some setbacks. Because my property is so small, Mr. Butler actually facilitated in that agreement with Russell. We were able to work something out to help us maintain the little bit of space we have. I was the first one, I guess, to buy on that stretch of land. I thought it would be a good place for business development down the road. Taking a little longer than what I thought, but that's okay. I received a message from Mr. Lewis the evening of June 25th of this year. I arranged a meeting for our first available date to learn about the project on Friday, June 28th. Through Mr. Lewis and subsequently other sources, I learned that Madison LLC will need to vacate my entrances and exits and will need to grade the front of my property for sight lines and distances to meet VDOT specifications. To accommodate an agreement with Madison LLC, I reached out to Mr. Lewis on July 2nd this year, detailing 4 items on which we asked for agreement. We really didn't receive any response. Mr. Lewis did send some proffers and a generalized map of what they were planning to do. We were actually able to speak with Mr. Butler just yesterday. It really wasn't enough time to reach any type of agreement between ourselves on what we would like to do concerning these entrances. The 4 things that we proposed to Madison LLC was what we would identify as a land swap. They have a very, very small parcel of what they're calling commercial land that sits to the rear of my 2 parcels. With setbacks and everything included on it, it seems to me as it's a throwaway parcel. It's of no use to anyone. It's bigger than a spite strip, but that's only because the road has to align with the Russell 150 LLC connector road. We asked to basically take that portion of land to give up a portion of our frontage for the grading that they need to get their deceleration lane into their Route 522 entrances. We also asked for them to extend that deceleration lane approximately 100 to 120 feet so that we could enter our property. One of their proffers is to give us an exit on the northernmost property of the two we have. The parcels legally are separated still, and although we may combine them down the road, that's not necessarily our plan. That would leave my southernmost parcel with no exit at that point, which I don't think is going to work. We've also asked, because of where their connector road comes in from 522, there's a spite strip issue. They have a very small portion of land between their road and our boundary, our southernmost boundary. It's not significant enough to act as a buffer. We asked them to increase that distance a little bit. If they move their road to the south, they don't have sightline distances from VDOT, and I'm not here to try to oppose them getting the road. The county staff has worked very hard on the road. Mr. Lewis has worked very hard on that road. We want to be a good neighbor. We generally support the project. At this point, our concerns really are that there's an agreement that the applicant is making with the county. They're going to promise the county to deal with my issues, but there's no agreement reached with me at this time. I have no other recourse later on other than legal action to try to access my properties or to develop my properties should something not get worked out. So we're simply asking and trying to make it a point of record that we'd like to negotiate these things with Madison LLC over the next few weeks, hopefully reach an agreement and come back and support the project wholeheartedly. I'm not sure if there's any other thing to add, but at least wanted to get that on the record. I know there was the advertising issue. We actually pointed that out to Mr. Butler yesterday. And we actually have already filed site plan at this point for our own property, and our site plans are in full contradiction to what their project is showing. There are lots of issues there. We didn't file a site plan to spite them in any way. This has been a site plan that's been on my drafting board since 2004. We just simply had an engineer put it on paper. He corrected a few things, made a few things a little bigger that I was ignorant of, but generally it's the same exact plan we've tried to do from the beginning. That's all. Thank you.
Sir, thank you for coming. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this application, this rezoning application? Well, seeing none, we will close the public hearing at this time. Is there anything that Mr. Shepherd has said that you may want to respond to? Hi, Mr. Butler.
Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Ben Butler. I'm the attorney for Madison Village. I did meet with Mark Stivers, the attorney for Mr. and Mrs. Shepherd, yesterday, and unfortunately, Mr. Madison is out of town, so he couldn't be reached definitively, but I have talked with him on the phone. Of course, the point is going to be is that these two landowners are going to have to work together because there are certain things that the Madison Village needs that it can't progress. For instance, one of them is no secret, we discussed it yesterday, a grading easement over the front of his property because the terrain out there is apparently high, and so to have visibility for a road entrance, it needs to have grading. So we got to work with him, and we want to work with him, and I think we can answer his questions. I think tonight, though, it was premature because Mr. Lewis has not been able to actually define, the distance, the site distance where this road entrance would go. The road is designed in one place. I'm not sure of the mechanics of that, how they came to that determination where to put the road, but certainly, we will try to accommodate everything that he does, and if we cut off his access, I think it's only fair that he get access to the roads that are in his system, and certainly the same thing with the sewer. I mean, I did talk to Mr. Madison today by phone. He said certainly, I mean, if the sewer is going to be put there, why not provide him with the stub that he can connect? So in answer to that, I would just tell you that I can't definitively say because there has to be an agreement, but there will have to be an agreement, otherwise this project is not going anyplace. That's my humble opinion. So anybody has a question, I'll be glad to answer.
sir.
Well, Mr. Butler, just one thing. You seem very optimistic that something will get worked out. Is Mr. Madison as optimistic?
Oh, I think so, yeah. He's done developments before. He did Sovereign Village. So, I mean, he knows. I mean, as I told Mr. Shepherd, in my experience, a good agreement is where you don't necessarily get everything you want, but both parties walk away at least satisfied that they got something. So Mr. Shepherd has to be satisfied.
Would it be a fair question to say you just need time? Is that
Yes,
is that
I think
what
that's
you need?
right,
Okay.
sure.
All right.
The question is whether that agreement needs to precede any rezoning, I suppose. I mean, that's the real question, I guess, for the planning commission to decide.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
you. Thank you. Mr. Ruddy, are there any comments you'd like to make? I need to ask a question about how is Mr. Shepherd going to get on his property?
Okay. The generalized development plan, if we zoom in there, that might give us some indication. As Mr. Shepherd mentioned, the properties are zone B2.
Right.
It was zoned commercially, and it would have to have some sort of commercial entrance on 522 to provide access. What this project is proposing, you can see their properties, is, of course, let me just help out here by... the applicant is proposing their main entrance to be in this location. And as part of the first phase of construction, the improvements in 522 go hand in hand with that, but also this connection over to the adjacent property 12, which is the Russell 150 project. At the same time, it's recognized that there's an arrow, if you will, here providing access from the access road to the property. In addition, one in this location. So the generalized development plan depicts how the two commercial properties could be accessed. In addition, there is, I believe it's Proffer 5, which specifically says that there'll be interparcel access provided with this project.
So basically, you're saying there's really two opportunities dealing with the Madison project, and one is off the entrance road, and the other is off the road that's leading to the property to the north. Is that correct?
Yes, they appear to be the most logical, and they've been represented by the applicant in the generalized development plan. There may be some different ways to do it, but as they're proposing right now, appears to have some ability to work and set itself up reasonably well.
Mike, is that little piece of land between the road that you're proposing, looks like north and south, is that big enough to do anything on right there? Can you put something on that?
Not necessarily for any buildings. Jump to the applicant's GDP. Well, either really work, but it doesn't really lend itself to any buildings because of the setbacks associated with that from the road right-of-way, in addition to the commercial property. So leftover piece of land, maybe it's part of the landscaping, stormwater management, certainly an access back to this property. In some cases, they're known as spite strips, and you want to avoid doing those. But in essence, of course, here, access has been provided, or potentially will be provided across them, so that takes away the spite designation. In my estimation, it would just be land that is commercially zoned, certainly not large enough to have any buildings on it, but may be part of the project in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, Mr. Thomas.
One of Mr. Butler's comments kind of tweaked my interest. Since the development and this rezoning would depend on reaching agreement with Mr. Shepherd on the grading easement on the front of his property, it would appear to me, contradictory to what Mr. Butler said, that we should have that agreement as part of the package before we would rezone it, because the rezoning can't occur if that agreement is not reached. So if we would rezone the property, the agreement's never reached, how does that, which comes first, the horse or the cart there? And it appears to me that we have to have the agreement before we do the rezoning, or it actually should be part of the package that it is a rezonable piece of property. Now, I guess unless the developer comes up with some other unique way to get into the site without that grading easement. so.
Yeah, I think, it would be nice to have an agreement in place, and to do it in the most logical way the entrance would be situated. I'm sure there are different ways that they could design that entrance to do that, but it wouldn't be the best approach, perhaps. I'm sure they could perhaps move the road a little bit and do some work out in 522, combination of retaining walls. So there may be a variety of different ways that they could get there, but I believe they all recognize that there's a simple and straightforward way of doing it that would be acceptable to VDOT, and that's what they're moving forward with right now.
Mike, I don't see where it's any different than you have to, in other areas there where you have to prep a road to go to somebody else's property. I mean, it's something the county kind of requires. This is a very similar situation. If they're going to eliminate his entrance because they're putting that one in, it would just make sense that they would supply access to his property.
They actually have to regrade his property, though, don't they? As to put the entrance in. So they have to go on the property and actually regrade the front and cut it down. So he will lose the use of part of his property. Is that a fair statement?
It's fair that the entrance on 522 would be greatly restricted, if not eliminated, and that's why I think that it was important for this application to make efforts to recognize access to those commercial properties. But most definitely.
Because that's about 15 or 20 feet above 522.
It is. There are two entrances on the two properties that are Mr. Shepherd's. In addition, there's an entrance presently on this property. Those entrances were placed when the 522 improvement project was done a good number of years ago. Of course, those were entrances that recognized every parcel along 522. They're substantial entrances, but may not be commercial entrances to the standard that VDOTs may have today.
Another question is, will VDOT allow an entrance on parcel 14 there that's only 250 feet back? They may insist on going to the roundabout for a cut-in. They might not allow one there.
You mean internal to the project, not on 522?
On parcel 14 there.
Yes, correct.
So they may not allow a curb cut in there.
And I think that's why the applicant may well have set it up at this point, because obviously the same individual owns both properties and access has been provided, just very roughly, at the one location where access seems to make sense.
Mr. Moan.
Mike, just to summarize, relative to the access issue, the staff feel comfortable that based on the proffer language and what's shown on the generalized development plan, that there's a sufficient commitment by the applicant to ensure that access occurs with development, that can be implemented through subsequent development applications?
I do believe that the access will be accommodated. The applicant improved their proffer statement to ensure that those road connections would be done with the first phase of development prior to occupancy, to ensure that that access would not only be there to their project, but to those two commercial projects.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else of Mr. Roddy?
No, nothing to add, but to recognize the public hearing and the appropriate posting.
Yes.
Cannot say what happened, but of course the sign hasn't been there for a few days, so it would be appropriate. Planning Commission has previously tabled things or postponed decision on things for a certain amount of time. A meeting schedule has changed here recently, so I think whatever is the appropriate for the Planning Commission is the appropriate time.
Madam Chair, I propose that because the posting hasn't been there, and I did look Monday, Tuesday, and today, and I actually drove up into the property, which was a little dicey getting back out on 522, but I did that this afternoon, and I think we ought to table this for a period of 90 days to allow it to be posted. I would also encourage the Madison group and the Shepherd group to get together and work out some deals between now and then acceptable to everybody, so we don't have to deal with that again at the next meeting, but that's not part of the motion. I just table it for 90 days.
Second.
Mr. Unger?
Unger, yes.
Ambrogi, yes.
Manuel, yes.
Crockett, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Kenny, yes.
Triplett, yes.
Dunlap, yes.
Moan, yes.
And the chair votes yes. And I think also there are a sufficient number of other issues that were brought up this evening that you may want to attend to. For example, I think that the issue of single-family detached in housing and the timing. Mike, did you get the timing that you wanted in terms of the extension of the roads? All three of them. Yeah, get that on the list as well. Anybody else remember, because there were a number of issues that came up, and we've taken care of Mr. Shepherd's needs. And I think someone raised the issue of the potential of phasing. And again, I had this, there are multiple types of housing that have been listed in a variety of different places. And it's puzzling to me that if there's not going to be single-family detached constructed, why is it in the proffers? So I think we're all done. We all done? Okay, thank you. And the tabling for 90 days has to deal with the opportunity for the applicant to deal with some of these issues and meet our schedule as well. So, okay, our next item is a information and discussion item, and it is height requirements in the EM, M1, and M2 districts, and this deals with a revision to the Frederick County zoning ordinance to increase the maximum heights in the extractive manufacturing, the light industrial, and the industrial general zoning districts. Mrs. Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. As you stated, this is an ordinance amendment to address the heights in 3 different zoning districts. This was an amendment that staff received a private request from that we are moving forward. So as you stated, this is the EM, M1, and M2 districts. The current heights in these districts, first off, the EM Extractive Manufacturing District, the current by right height is 45 feet, and then the M1 and M2 districts, those are both 60 feet. So the proposed revision that you have in your agenda, first I'll go over just the EM district. What we propose to do is increase the maximum height from 45 feet to 60 feet by right, and to allow for up to 200 feet for unmanned structures with a conditional use permit. Now, with the unmanned structures that exceed the 60-foot, there's an additional setback required for everything that goes over 60 feet up to that 200. So just to go over an example of how that would work, in the EM, you have a 100-foot setback from residential RA property. So if you have a 200-foot structure, it's approved by a CUP, you would need to be 380 feet from a property line. Now you get to this, the 200 feet minus the 60 is the 140. You take the 140 times the 2 foot, which gets you the 280, plus the initial setback of 100 feet. So the 380. And that's just a quick example of how the setbacks with the additional 2 foot would work. So now, back to the revisions. In the M1 and M2 districts, what we're proposing is to keep the by right height at 60 feet, but allow up to 150 feet with a conditional use permit, and we've also added the additional setback with that, which is the 2 foot for every foot over 60. There's also a change for the M1 and M2 in the supplementary use regulations that allows exemptions that would increase the height for automated storage facilities as well as manufacturing facilities. Now, note at your tables there's a slight modification to that automated allowance that takes out the O&M. That was a slight typo. So it's just the M1 and M2 districts. The OM would stay the same. So the DRC discussed these amendments at their July 25th meeting, and what's in your packet is what the consensus of that committee came from. So tonight we're seeking comments from the Commission to forward to the Board of Supervisors on these proposed amendments, and I would be glad to answer any questions.
Questions of Mrs. Perkins?
Okay.
Comments? Yes.
More of a comment than a question. Conditional use permits have a connotation associated with them. And it's, in my opinion, this is the wrong use for a conditional use permit. Now, I know words and perceptions mean different things to everybody. My perception for a conditional use permit, when we issue a specific conditional use permit for a specific site, comes down to, well, it's supposed to be reapproved every 2 years. If there's something occurs out there where you have a neighbor or even a planning commission or a zoning administrator or a board of supervisors that gets a bee in their bonnet and all of a sudden doesn't like that 200-foot structure out there because it destroys the viewscape, that can be revoked. And that would make it almost impossible for a developer to get financing or even invest their own money to go out there and put that kind of money in a construction project that people have the perception that can be revoked sometime down the road, even though they've complied with everything that was committed to and everything that was in the regulation. And I understand that maybe my perception may be inaccurate on that, but I think my perception is probably held, that perception is probably held by the majority of the people in Frederick County. And if we do this, and I understand that doing it by right has some challenges and some potential impacts, but I hate to see us call it a conditional use permit. I would like to see us come up with a different name, and yes, I know other districts and other counties use the same term, conditional use rezoning, but when people have the perception that they can come to the board because someone 10 years from now decides they don't like that and have it revoked, that's going to be very difficult for a manufacturer, for an owner, to get financing to do that. And, it may not be able to happen, but it's still that perception's there, and it's going to cause difficulty getting, being able to construct it. So I don't have any problem with this, and yes, I can see potential with making it a by right use. Do we want a 200-foot tower next to Belle Grove or next to, the battlefields? No, we don't. Do we have areas zoned in that area, those areas that if we made it a by right use, you could have a 200-foot tower there? Yeah, we probably do. So there has to be some way to control this, but I don't think calling it a conditional use permit is the right way to go. We did one conditional use permit out on Route 50 West where we built a gas station with a conditional use permit. I still think that was wrong. That should have just been a plain old rezoning. But it is what it is, and I guess I'm just not convinced that a conditional use permit is the right way to go for this. And I have no problem with the 200 feet because, I think it's probably the density we need. I mean, we have to go up if we don't want to go out. So,
Right. The reason that this conditional use permit was pursued with the heights is that in the past, when staff has taken height increases forward, they've been met with mixed reviews. So that's why we've tried to increase the ability for the Board of Supervisors to have oversight on these uses to make sure that that where the additional height is proposed is an appropriate location. As far as the revocation issue, to my knowledge, Frederick County has never revoked a conditional use permit. Typically, you do see them with home occupation. So there's a component of a neighbor issue where if the business starts creating a nuisance, then we have to go back and readdress the CUP, whether it's too many cars there, noise, things like that. The industrial commercial ones are a bit different because with the CUPs, you have conditions directly related to what the height increase, whether it be additional landscaping, screening of a use, things like that. And then those conditions are going to be implemented on a site plan that's then approved by the county. So they have more vesting with the site plan in addition to just the CUP. And with the specific conditions would only address the height. So then if a violation were to occur with their CUP, the only thing we would be seeking would be compliance, not revocation, whether it be replanting trees, fixing their screening, things like that. It's not really going to address their parking because that's covered in a by right ordinance. It's not going to address things that are covered elsewhere, such as noise. So then someone couldn't come back with an arbitrary complaint against them, and then the county would then revoke, obviously, That's not really something that we foresee as happening. And many localities in Virginia utilize CUPs even for this height purpose. We did a good bit of research with other localities, then they addressed the height increases the same way. So that's why we chose to go with this option.
I'd still rather see it written up as you can go from 100 feet to 200 feet with the approval of the board. Certainly have the board approve it, that's fine. Give a height that by right you have this height, but with approval of the board you can go to this height and not call it a conditional use permit. It still has board approval, and it's something then that is very clear and very succinct. And I think I do remember a few CUPs that we revoked. Over the years.
Madam Chair, if I could jump in. I tend to share the concern about a CUP, but I think there probably is a role for some additional oversight, in particular areas where we have existing zoning, where we could have impacts, and those need to be considered and weighed. And the CUP may not be the right mechanism, for that, but I think that we may be getting to a point where, if we're trying to consider different alternatives or allow some flexibility in design or intensity within our commercial districts, our industrial districts, there might be a better mechanism. And maybe it's something like another tier of approval which doesn't have any connotation or suggestion that it can be revoked, that it's a special exception, something along those lines that's a level above a conditional use permit or a special use permit that would provide some greater degree of assurance to a business or, the economic development community that, they're making this investment. If they get their site plan approved consistent with that special exception, they're done. But in the process of getting that special exception approved, there is a full opportunity for the board to consider any unique impacts and, to get conditions that would address impacts. So I don't know, I'm just thinking that's a bigger question because that doesn't just apply to this issue. But we may be kind of moving in that direction from a complexity perspective, where we want to protect rights and protect investment and provide those assurances, but still allow the community an opportunity to take a look and provide input.
And definitely between now and the board discussion, staff will investigate the alternative options to still allow a board approval without the conditional use connotation.
Anybody have anything to say? The discussion at DRRC was interesting.
Yeah, I'll just chime in that at DRC, we were all in agreement that there wouldn't be any conditions to revoke it. The conditions we'd be looking for is basically what the height would be, possibly what it would look like, make sure they just didn't put up a frame that had to have a covering on it. Basically, they'd be proffering what they were building to the board in order to get the CUP, but and we talked about letting individual properties apply for it, or in areas where we have a master plan business park, let the whole park do it under one CUP and raise their limit. But yeah, there was never any discussion about putting some kind of language in there and making a condition for revocation.
And that's my problem with the CUP, because the CUP inherently has that condition for revocation. So I totally agree with doing this. It's just, what do we call it now?
We can call it something else.
Yeah.
Is that doable, that we call it something else?
I will go back over what we can do with the ordinance between now and the board discussion.
Back
Yes, ma'am.
over, we've done this thing to death the night we were there. As a matter of fact, it was brought up almost word for what you said, Roger, including Route 50 CUP. I figured that would get brought up tonight, too. I don't know any other way to word it than that, or to do it than the way we did it. And I was against it probably as much as you were until we talked about it for a long time. If we take it back, I don't know what we're going to do when we go back.
I don't really think we would need to go back to the committee level with this. I think the intent is clear of what the commission wants to see, and between now and the board discussion, we can investigate the options and whether or not that's something that's achievable, and modify it based on the commission discussions. Or if we're not able to do something like that, it would proceed as written, possibly.
You okay with that, Mr. Unger?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Gary? Okay, have you received your necessary comments?
Yes, ma'am.
And thank you very much. Okay, our next item is also an information discussion item. It's transfer of development rights ordinance revision to this ordinance to update the TDR density rights table, including a provision for contiguous lots and addition of a TDR density conversion rate for rural to urban transfers. Mrs. Perkins.
Again, thank you. This is, as you stated, an amendment to our TDR ordinance. There's 3 separate sections that are proposed to be modified with this change. First is a TDR density table, second is a contiguous sending properties provision, and third is a density right conversion rate. Now, I'll go through each of those revisions separately. As I said, the first revision is the TDR density table. Now, what this is a revision to bring the TDR density maximums into conformance with the updated RP densities maximums that were adopted back in January. As you may remember, we did a pretty significant RP ordinance update that increased the maximum densities, so now we need to bring the TDR table into conformance with that. So now we're basing it on housing types and parcel size, consistent with the existing table. We're also increasing the RP allowable density when utilizing TDRs for development, and we're also increasing the RA permitted maximum densities when using TDRs to be consistent with the maximum RP densities when you use transferred rights. What that does is it would allow you to utilize either RP or RA land at the same density, no matter what, as long as you're using TDRs to make TDRs viable in both scenarios. Now, the second revision is a minor one. This is to include a provision that allows use of contiguous parcels for TDR transfers. So the circumstance you may have now is that you'll have a large landowner that has multiple parcels. They have one that fronts on the state road and the others that adjoin it from the back that may not have state road frontage. We want to give that owner the opportunity to bring all of their contiguous parcels in on one TDR application. So, revision number 3. This is a density right conversion rate. This is a revision to include what we're calling a conversion rate that would apply to density rights being applied to receiving properties. This conversion would be based on the type of housing unit being developed on the receiving property, such as single-family detached, attached, or multifamily. This is the breakdown in your agenda. So what this states, when you use TDRs to develop receiving properties, the way it would work is that one TDR right would equal one single-family detached unit, one TDR right would equal 1.5 single-family attached or townhouse unit, and one TDR right would equal 1.7 multifamily dwelling units. Now, this is based on the kind of the development impact model and how they're broken down by unit size. What it does, it makes one TDR right really the same no matter what you're developing, so that a TDR doesn't get devalued based on what a property developer wants to put on their property. So it still equates to the same impact because the single family obviously has the greater impact and it's tiered down. So it's really just to make it consistent and the same value across the board. So the history for this, revision number 1 was discussed by the DRC back in April. It was discussed by the Planning Commission in May. After the commission discussion, we put it on hold to await the other 2 ordinance amendments so that we could bring them all forward as one package. So the DRC then discussed revisions 2 and 3 at their July meeting. So you'll have to excuse that typo because that's incorrect. Sorry about that. So tonight we're seeking comments from the Planning Commission to forward to the Board of Supervisors. I would be glad to answer any questions.
Questions of Mrs. Bergens? Any questions? Hi.
I just got one, Candace. On number 2, where the contiguous pieces, the way that's written, does that mean say the person has a lot with state road frontage, that one definitely has to give up its rights before the ones behind it can? Okay.
You would need to bring them in as one package.
Okay, so if they've already brought that in, they can't come back now and bring in the ones behind them?
I mean, they could then, if they were all contiguous, we would still, if they brought in the first one first and then wanted to bring in the contiguous ones later, it would be possible. And then they could still retain rights for the one that meets the requirements and retain rights for the other ones.
All right.
Any other questions? Thoughts? I would share with the commission that, thank you, Candace, the list of the current proffers are in that particular issue. I mean, items. So if you want to know what they are currently, and Eric said he was going to zip them to us on our magic machine.
Yeah, so the current development impact model figures are on sheet 2, page 2 of the TDR agenda memo.
Thank you for that. Did you get enough?
I'm good, thank you.
Yes. Okay, I think we're down to our number 8 other. And there are a couple items here. First of which is we expected to hear back the master development plan for Shenandoah. And apparently we exceeded our responsibilities here. And the Board of Supervisors took care of the severing of the commercial property at their meeting this past week. So that's why that's not here. We have received from Mr. Tibbs, from Mr. Riley's office, the assignments that are back in the planning arena from the business-friendly group. And Eric, you want to just briefly say what they are? I can run down my printed list.
As a result of the business-friendly study, is this on? As a result of the business-friendly study, we have 3 projects that we need to work on. 2 of them will go to the Development Review and Regulations Committee, and that involves reviewing the master plan process, as well as reviewing the landscape ordinance to make sure that they're functioning properly, to make sure they're necessary, and to make sure that it's business-friendly standards. So you'll see that at the committee level over the next couple months. And the 3rd project that we've been assigned is to evaluate the development impacts model and how we might be able to provide credits within the model. Currently, the model projects what the impacts are as a result of development, but it does not consider credits, tax contributions, if you will. So that's a project that we're also going to look at. And that development impacts model will go through the Development Impacts Model Oversight Committee, but we'll certainly keep the Planning Commission in the loop as to how those discussions go.
Thank you.
So those are the 3 projects that we'll work on over the next few months.
Thank you. Also, Eric was kind enough to share with me the housing report for the first 6 months of this year, and the totals for the county for this year is 247 new housing units. The total for the year previous was 171 at this point. So you can see we're beginning to add on again, and I hope we're all ready for it. One final, no, not one final. You each, I think, should have gotten a communication, thanks to Renee, about your membership in Plan Virginia, which has had multiple names up until now. But Plan Virginia is the organization that provides to us as professional planning people, or volunteer, I guess, some opportunities for further knowledge. One of the things, and I would suggest, unfortunately, Mr. Marston isn't here, but Chuck, you probably want to look at, there's a certification program, and the one coming up is too close, but we can get, if you look at your communication from them, take a look, because we would encourage that. And the other is there's a Commonwealth Planning and Zoning Conference open to any of the members of the Planning Commission who would like to go. It's in Roanoke, and the date's the 13th through the 15th, and it's usually pretty good. So keep that in mind. We're now reconnected up with those folks. And I think the last thing we need to do is we do not have an agenda for September the 4th, so we'll need to cancel that meeting.
Move we cancel the September 4th meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Now we're at number 9.
We don't have a meeting September 4th?
No agenda.
We canceled it.
There you go.
For adjournment.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? All opposed? Thank you all very much.